This is why you can't make clean tattoos even though you're trying all of the techniques that you've learned. Let's start with our depth. When it comes to our depth, it's very important that we work at the correct depth and a consistent depth so that we get clean techniques and clean results, consistent clean results. When it comes to the depth of the skin, we're going to think about a swimming pool. We've got our water at the top, and then we've got the bottom of the pool, which we do not want to hit. If we dive into that pool and we hit the bottom, we're going to hurt ourselves and do some damage. Once we put the needle into the skin, once we dive into the pool, you're going to hear the term floating. When I was learning to tattoo, people always used to tell me, make sure the needle is floating. As long as the needle is floating, you're not going too shallow or too deep. Make sure that your needle isn't going so far down that you hit the bottom of the pool, you hit past the dermis, you're hitting into that fatty tissue, you're hitting a layer that you don't want to hit, and it's going to create a blowout, scarring, unnecessary damage. If you're not going deep enough, then you're not working deep enough into the skin to be working efficiently the way that you need to. These top layers of skin, they're going to repair themselves. So we obviously have dead skin that repairs itself over time, and if you want your tattoos to last, they need to be deeper than the levels of skin that replace themselves and heal. So when it comes to your line work, your shading, your packing, there's going to be this sweet spot in the middle of the water level where it's safe to work. You're not going too deep, you don't have to worry about hitting the bottom, but you're working deep enough that the tattoo isn't going to fall out as the skin replaces itself and heals. So as you're tattooing, you're going to feel a sensation where it feels like you're floating. It feels like a soft, spongier part of the skin where you felt the initial resistance of the needle entering the skin, and you're not feeling too much resistance by hitting the bottom of the skin. You're going to find this nice sweet spot where it feels like it clicks. That's the only way that I can describe it. Now, the reason that tattooing can be so difficult is because we're not just worried about our depth and how far down we're moving into the skin. We're also trying to keep a nice straight line at the same time. So we're not just thinking about up or down, we're thinking about side to side. And all of a sudden, this problem becomes very three-dimensional and very complex. So when we're trying to pull a straight line, we're trying to keep our line nice and straight, but we're also thinking about our depth. Is our voltage right? Is the stroke right? All of these things are going to make the whole experience overwhelming, and we don't know where to start. Some of you might be even working with the right depth, but maybe your voltage is too high or too low, and it's not being efficient enough if it's too low. If it's running too high, then it might be damaging the skin too much. There's too much blood, it's blowing out, and even if you get the depth right, having a voltage is too high or too low is never going to click. So I teach the 5 tattoo variables, and the first variables that I like to focus on are my voltage and my depth. Obviously, working with our depth is key, it's absolutely necessary. And the next thing to do is make sure that our voltage is set correctly so that the machine can do the work. If you feel like it doesn't matter how much pressure you put on, nothing is just working for you, a big part of your problem could very well be your voltage being too low or too high. So because of the complexity of pulling line work, when we begin doing our line work on fake skin, the first thing I tell my students to do is don't worry about a straight line. Let's just do some wiggly lines so that we can experiment with our depth and our voltage, so that once we're pulling a line, instead of getting something that's kind of faded and broken up or too dark and too messy, let's just try to make a nice squiggly line where it feels like we've gained some control because we've experimented with our depth and experimented with our voltage. So after the voltage and the depth, the next variable that I will think about is my hand speed. My hand speed is going to play a very big part in this process. Now, let's just say you were watching me tattoo for a second, and I've got years of experience in tattooing. If I know that my depth is right and my voltage is okay, my hand speed can still mess things up or make things work. So let's say my depth is good, I'm not going too deep, too shallow, and my voltage is high enough that it's going to power the needle and make good, efficient tattooing. Even if you have all of that correctly, if you're moving too quickly or too slowly, if you're moving too quick, you're not giving the needle enough time in the skin to efficiently put the ink into the skin. Even if the line is solid, it might be very faded and not as solid and rich in the skin as it should be. You might not even get the needle as thick as it should be. So if we work too fast, we're not giving the needle enough time to do the work that it needs to. Imagine you're painting a wall, and instead of slowly painting the wall and laying that paint on thick, imagine you were just really quick and you brushed it on. It's not going to be as thorough and as saturated as it needs to be. On the other side of the spectrum, going too slow, if you were doing the opposite and it kept hitting too many times, then you're depositing too much ink into this part of the skin, and it's also the needle's hitting the skin too many times, which is going to cause unnecessary excessive damage. So you can see already with our first 3 out of the 5 variables, we can see how many different possible combinations of outcomes that you might be achieving when you're doing your tattoos. And so it's very difficult to straight off the bat identify which one of your variables might be causing you issues. The more that you share with me as your mentor, the more it gives me the insight to pick things apart and try to understand what might be going wrong in your process and what we need to do in order to fix it and create solutions, create more control and understanding to identify these problems. The fact that I have this in my arsenal, the fact that I have this understanding, means that I know exactly how to analyze my tattoo process, analyze my machine, needle, my client's skin, and I know exactly what I need to do to change it to get the results that I want. And the problem is that some of you aren't trying to find this sweet spot. You don't let the tip of the needle sit on top of the water and then slowly lower it down. Some of you guys are just diving in and potentially going too deep. Some of you are diving in and you're worried about going too deep, so you stay too shallow because you're worried about coming down here in fear of going too deep. And this is why I always say, let the tip of your needle touch the tip of the skin so that you can feel your coordination. If this is the top of the skin or the top of the water, I let the very tip of my needle touch and I will slowly lower the very tip of the needle down until I feel like I have reached my sweet spot. And now, because we're holding the machine somewhere up here, it's very easy to try to, lower this part and all of your senses are up here. The more that you grow senses down here where your needle is, the more you have more coordination and you have more control over your needle. And the more you will feel it sink down into the sweet spot, you're just going to have more connection with your machine and the process that's happening with the needles in the skin. And now the last 2 variables are the stroke or the throw of your tattoo machine. The stroke and the throw, if you can imagine that on a traditional machine, this is where the needle bar is and the needle is down here. The distance that this bar travels up and down is the length of the stroke. So as your machine moves up and down, this needle might reach its bottom here and its top might be here as it goes up and down. So this distance is the stroke. If we have the bottom of our pool and we have the sweet spot in here, the stroke is basically the punch. So a short stroke is like having your needle here and letting it drop into the skin from here. I'm being quite extreme just to make my point, but a short throw is like this, and a big throw is like having your needle all the way up here and dropping it into the water. It's gonna make a much bigger splash. There's a lot more momentum and a lot more force behind that punch, right? So when we marry our stroke with our voltage, if we had a big stroke and a big pullback, but low voltage, it means a big pullback, but then a really slow punch. So it doesn't matter if you've got a big stroke and a big pullback on your punch. If you have a really low voltage, you're not going to utilize that stroke and that power of the punch that you have, which means that you're going to have a really soft punch even though you've pulled back. As we begin to up the voltage and we have more speed, we need to understand that that speed contributes heavily to the power. If we want a delicate approach because it's a very fine needle and we want to be able to take our time into the skin, that means a softer punch and a slower voltage to allow more time into the skin. If we want more time in the skin, we want that needle hitting the skin less frequently per second so that we can spend more seconds in the skin working. So if you're not understanding the stroke and the throw, then you're leaving one of your variables unaccounted for and out of control. And as long as something is out of your control, then you're never gonna be able to control it enough to make it do what you want it to do. Now, when it comes to the shading, I'll tell you why it's a little bit different. As I said over here with my space in between the needle marks, if I was working at, let's say, a 4.2 stroke, and I'm working with a fast hand speed because I want a nice peppery style of shading. The fact that there's a bigger stroke means that it takes more time for the needle to come up and down, which means if I'm working with a regular hand speed, I'm going to get these space in between the needle marks. If I take this stroke down to, let's say, like a 3.6 mil, and my hand speed isn't as fast, let's say my hand speed is slow, because there's less distance to travel up and down, and I'm working with a slower hand speed, it means that the needle marks are going to be a lot closer together, purely because the needle doesn't have as far to travel up and down before it comes back to the skin, and I'm working with a slower hand speed, so I'm minimalizing the space in between all of the needle marks. So once we begin to understand this, we understand what the stroke and the throw does to our line work, what it does to our shading. We understand what part this plays in context to the other variables that we have to keep control of. Our last variable is the skin. The type of skin, how much do we need to stretch the skin? Are we working over a wrist where there's very thin skin? We're working right on top of bone with not much muscle and tissue underneath the skin. It's going to give a completely different sensation on the wrist to what it would on the inside bicep, where there's loads of muscle and tissue underneath the skin, giving a lot more cushion underneath. A completely different experience altogether. So let's go back to our pool analogy again. If we were to tattoo the skin and our needle is coming into the skin and affecting the surface of the water or the surface of the skin. If we're working on an area like the bicep where there's a lot of room for the skin to bend down as the needle comes into the skin, it's very important that we stretch the skin enough so that it doesn't bounce and move and wave too much as we're trying to tattoo it. If this is moving up and down constantly as we're trying to tattoo it, then it's impossible for our needle depth to be consistent all the way through, because the skin is going to be changing so much as we're tattooing it. Your needle might catch in the skin because the skin is wobbling too much. The stretch creates a little bit of stability so that we can control the skin and have control of the depth of our needle as we're working around the skin. Now, what happens if we overstretch and the skin is super tight? It means that as you begin to tattoo the skin, you're probably going to cut the skin and do too much damage because it's too tight. If you're overstretching, you could definitely be cutting the skin. So now you understand a bit more about this, but you're still thinking, how does this apply to me and my work? You have the option to connect with me so that I can give you feedback on your work, analyze your work, your techniques, the things that you're using, so that we can try to identify what might be going wrong in your tattoo variables. If you want what I wish I had when I started tattooing, visit thebuzzacademy.com. You'll see my free Skool community that you can join, share your work, get feedback. Once you're in my free Skool community, you have the option to join my course and become a student and really start putting this stuff to good use.